So, that brings us to the hypothesis. When you think of hypothesis, I'm guessing you think of a question. But a hypothesis actually is not a question. The research question, that's the question. The hypothesis is something that you go out to actually prove or disprove. So it's a statement. And it's a statement about a proposed relationship between two variables, represented by either the null hypothesis or an alternative hypothesis. So you could be talking about income and college degrees. And your hypothesis is that someone with a college degree will make more than someone without a college degree. That's something that you can actually prove. You can look at whether someone has a college degree, look at their income, and compare it to someone who doesn't have a college degree. Look at their income. The null hypothesis, as we talked about here, the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. The null hypothesis is where we actually are when we start the research itself. And it states that there is no relationship between the variables. If we are studying the impact of mood on car accidents, the null hypothesis is that mood does not affect car accidents. If we're studying the effect of college degrees on the amount of income you make, the null hypothesis is that college degrees don't impact the amount of money that you make. The alternative hypothesis is that, as we thought, mood does affect car accidents, and a college degree actually does affect the amount of money you make in your lifetime. One of the things we have to ask ourselves is what makes good research? Because if we're going to be good researchers, we want to know what you got to do to make good research, right? Well, good research should be valid, reliable, and generalizable. Validity, reliability, and generalizability. These are the three things that you're searching for when you're constructing a study, especially a quantitative study, where validity, reliability, and generalizability are extremely important. Validity is actually looking at whether the study measures what is intended to measure. Do you get it right? If you're throwing darts at the dartboard, are you hitting the bullseye each time? Reliability, on the other hand, it's not even talking about validity. It's just looking at whether the study can be conducted time and time again and get the same results. Once again, thinking about the dartboard, you can consistently throw in the 3 ring on the number 1. Each time you throw, it hits the 3 ring on the number 1. But you're actually trying to hit the bullseye. So each time you do your study, you get the same result, but the result's wrong. So with a quantitative study, what you're seeking for is perfect reliability and perfect validity. If you have perfect validity, then you have perfect reliability. But you can have perfect reliability and have absolutely no validity. And then the last thing is generalizability. Will the findings of this study apply to some other population or group of people? And this is really more in relationship to how you drew the study. What's the population? Did you use random sampling? Is it a probability or a non-probability study? These are all important things. So it's important when we conduct a study that the results mean something to other people, even if they weren't involved in the study. As such, we look at validity, we look at reliability, and we look at generalizability. If you don't have all three of those, then your study is going to be somewhat questionable. This brings us to feminist methodologies and how maybe feminist methodologies might be different than the traditional methodologies within the discipline. A feminist methodology treats women's experiences as legitimate, empirical, and theoretical resources. It promotes social science that may bring about policy change to help women and is is as conscious of the role of the researcher as that of the subjects being studied. Feminist methodology is not meant to exclude men's perspectives. Rather, it is meant to add men's perspectives. Much previous research has neglected the input of certain individuals who weren't taken as seriously as others. So feminist methodologies tries to account for some of those oversights. Women's impressions and interpretations have been overlooked. People of color and other minorities from a feminist perspective have been overlooked, and they're trying to draw attention to this process. What are some types of data collection? There's participant observation. You can do interviews, you can do survey research, you can do comparative research, experimentation, content analysis, historical methods. And these different kinds of data collection help researchers get a different aspect of the research project. Many researchers use mixed method approaches. I talked about mixed methods earlier, where you're maybe starting out with quantitative or maybe starting out with qualitative study to kind of get an idea of what's going on out in the field, and then you follow it up. Now that you know a little bit more about what's going on, you follow it up with a qualitative research. I'm going to post a video by the guys that do, sorry about that, I was blanking on, Stephen Levitt, who is one of the writers of a book called Freakonomics, which will also take a look at some of the stuff that they did in Freakonomics. But it's a good way, funny way to look at how comparative or how mixed methods can actually be used. It is important to decide which kind of data collection will help you get the best results for your study, and not to design your study around the kind of research you want to do. For example, if you want to study the number of people living in a household, you may need to do some survey research. But if you're nervous about doing math and calculating results, you might think to yourself, I could just do some interviews instead. However, interviews aren't going to get you the information that you need to answer your question. So if you really want to study a certain phenomenon, then you have to commit yourself to using the appropriate types of methods. And in this case, the appropriate types of methods would be quantitative data analysis, even if you're not comfortable using quantitative data analysis. Mitchell Dunier, he wrote a book called Sidewalks, and he became a full-on participant observer doing an ethnography on the city streets of New York. And as an ethnographer, he wrote on the Sidewalk Society. He talks about the ethics and ethnographic research, and talks really about what it means to actually become part of a world like that, and the type of information that you can gain from doing that type of research. Duncan Watts, on the other hand, describes his research on the Matthew effect, and he hypothesizes that it is not just the quality of something that determines its success, but it's also the luck of it catching on via peer-to-peer influence. So for Watts, it's not just the innate cultural quality of the product, but also the luck of it catching on, as they said, via peer-to-peer influence that determines its success. Along with his co-researchers, Watts tested his hypothesis by creating an online site called the Music Lab, where MP3s from unknown bands were posted. Watts and his colleagues studied how posted rankings affected people's opinions about the song, and then observed through those observations, made some statements about causality and in reference to this idea of peer-to-peer influence. It might not just be that the song is good, it might be that other people are saying the song is good, therefore the song becomes good. The ethics of social research, this is an important aspect of, one of the most important aspects of social science research. I've posted a video in section 2 on the human behavior experiments, and this deals directly with ethical behavior in many important research projects that have forced the discipline to do things differently because of what went on in these studies. Researchers must meet codified standards, which are set by professional associations, academic institutions, or research centers when conducting studies. And researchers must guard against causing physical, emotional, or psychological harm to their subjects. This is generally guaranteed by the IRB or something like it, the Institutional Review Board, which is provided by the university the professor is affiliated with. Generally speaking, I don't think that the universities really care about you. They're just trying to protect themselves. And they require an institutional review board to ensure that the type of researchers you're going to do out there isn't going to come back on them and haunt them. Some of the most unethical research projects that we've seen up to date are the Zimbardo prison study or the Milgram shock study. These kinds of studies might tell us something about social life, but possibly at too great a cost. As a result or the professionalization and standardization of the field, we now tend to avoid projects with these kinds of risks, or else we approach them with great caution so as to protect our research participants. And, of course, to protect the university, which, generally speaking, is who we are working for. One of the pinnacles of ethics in social science research is informed consent and voluntary participation. These guidelines for researchers are used to ensure subjects know they are participating in a study and have voluntarily chosen to participate in those studies. You're not forcing them to do something that they don't want to do. Public sociology, of course, refers to the practice of using sociological research, teaching, and service to reach a wider audience and to influence society. Studying society inherently leads itself to social activism and the possibility for positive social change. As a budding sociologist yourself, you might start engaging in a discourse and conversation with friends outside of your classes about the sociological issues. Public sociology allows you to do that. And then there's the political battle over statistical sampling. How we sample the population we are studying can have significant effects on what we end up finding. Census Bureau sampling methods are used as an example in this text. When federal funding and congressional seats are dependent on population size, it matters significantly how accurately the Census Bureau counts the U.S. population. The U.S. population, the Census Bureau accounts of the U.S. population should be considered the gold standard. Then if you're doing quantitative research and the census has the type of data that you need, it certainly should be where you start. You can make it fit your needs after the fact, but if you start with their collection, you should be good.